All right. Hey, guys. So I'm going to go back to a tiny bit. Welcome to Careers for Musicians. And we are musicians. We have careers.
We
and
do.
We're here to tell you about how you can do that, too. My name is Mason Lieberman.
And I'm Jess Destramp.
And I'm going to real fast. We're going to tell you a bit about who we are. There we go. Animated transitions.
We are slick.
Top tier quality. So my name is Mason Lieberman. I'm a composer, producer, recording artist, performer, and consultant. And favorite credits, I was a composer for Disney for the Beyblade Burst series, Rooster Teeth for Ruby. I've worked as a recording artist for League of Legends, for Super Smash Bros., The Walking Dead. I've worked with Namco Bandai, Fox, Screw Attack, you name it, all kinds of random stuff. I've shouted metal things on Korean MMOs, like all over the place, random stuff.
There we go. Awesome. I'm Jess, and my career is quite a bit different than Mason's. I am a music teacher by day and kind of a performer and arranger by night. So I teach middle school music and band. And I also, I'm a music department head, actually. And I'm the assistant conductor of an all-saxophone ensemble based up in Boston, the Saxyderms. Shout out to the Saxyderms.
Their choice.
Yes. I have taught private music lessons for years and years and years. I've taught privately on my own and also in established music studios. I record with Materia Collective. I record with the VGM Jazz Band Tournament Arc that Mason...
Also choice.
Also very choice. Mason and I do it together. And I'm actually performing tonight on the main stage with Smoochy Face, so come check that out.
It's going to be really amazing. Jess is a monster player. You are not going to want to miss it.
Mason's an excellent hype man.
I am so good at that. I'm much better at that than music. So, what do? Our goals for today basically is to help you guys to understand a lot of, one, where money comes from when you're looking to build a career, and how to target the things that you do to the right people in such a way as to make the money continue to appear when you want it to. Which is a really snazzy way of saying, get paid, get out. So, I think it's fair to say, if you're here, you're probably talented, you probably have passion, I'm sure you have a great work ethic, but you might not have a career yet. So let's talk a little bit about why.
Sure. So we have three main kind of career tracks up here. You can be an educator, you can be a player, you can be a producer. We have experience between the two of us in all those three tracks. So I can speak to the educator piece. So if you want to get a job in K-12 school, if you want to get a job teaching college, if you want to have a private studio of your own, meaning so for example, like I teach saxophone, I teach piano to kids, to adults. If you want to develop an online curriculum where Mason has some experience, if you want to do video conferencing, master classes, or sometimes even administration, but that, if you go into administration, that sometimes takes you away from actually teaching music and figuring out how to help other people teach music better.
But it can still be a very meaningful thing, even if you're not directly teaching music. If you are influencing the people who are, if you're influencing the direction of a program, as Jess does, she's a music program head, that can, in many ways, be directly as meaningful or impactful for kids. If your goal is to, bring music to children, you can't do much better than being the person who fights the district to make sure that there's money to get those kids instruments. That's pretty impactful on its own.
And speaking as I also have an admin that I report to. If I have a supportive admin, I can do my job so much better, and it makes a world of difference.
Mm-hmm. So this list is by no means all-inclusive. I just wanted to point out, if you're working in these specific ranges, some of the places you'll be getting your money. So I work a lot as a player, touring artist, and recording artist. So anything from, I'm a cello player, so I play weddings. I don't usually get invited to bars, but I have an electric cello to fix that. Touring, when I worked with Ruby, we did Austin City Limits, go figure. Recording, every video game, every movie, every TV show, we record things constantly. It's the nature of it. Selling your own, albums, singles, EPs, streaming can provide income, merchandising. At the end of the day, you're building a brand. You're not just putting together music and throwing it out in the ether. At the end of the day, people will stop because they hear the music, and they'll stay because they see you. So it's about building a personality. It's about building a relationship with the listeners. And as a producer, it's arguably the same thing, except you're not really so focused on the fans as you are on your fellow colleagues, on the other people who are working in game dev, who are working in film. So as a producer, you might work as a composer for film, game, TV, theater. You might be producing other people's music, doing the mixing, mastering. You might be involved in artist management. You might be running sessions. You might be telling people, all right, we're going to put together a tour track for you going from here to here to here. You might be involved in licensing negotiations. You might have written music that would be great on a TV show, and you don't have to write anything new for it. They just need to give you enough money to convince you to let them have it. You could be involved in consultation. You could be talking to people who want to build up their artistry, their branding, and if you have good knowledge and insight on that, you could be a resource for them. You could be involved in gear design. Please only do that if you're an engineer who's qualified to do that. Musicians, by default, don't have good ideas for this. We think we do. We don't. And you could be getting endorsements. That is a meaningful thing. That can be a source of money. Personally, I'm endorsed by NS Design for their electric cello for the CR6, which is like a 6-string electric cello. It's really great. Highly recommend. That's the end of my plug. But what you may be thinking as you're looking at this is, I'm probably doing a lot of those things, but maybe it's not really locking together the way that you're hoping it would. Maybe it's not coalesced quite yet. Maybe you feel like there isn't a through line from one gig to the next, and it just feels like dots in the ether that aren't really connecting to each other.
Yeah, you had one really good gig, and you want more of that, but you're not sure how to make that happen.
So the key for that, the key to build up that, is to know who you work for. Financial success as an artist relies on being able to successfully figure out who you work for and whether you're targeting everyday consumers or other businesses. And if so, targeting your personal brand and your artist identity to focus on those people.
And you might be thinking, wait a second, like I want to be a music teacher, consumers, businesses. This applies to, and we're going to talk about that in a sec.
Yeah. So first of all, if you're, say, a player or an artist, if your goal is, I write songs and I like to make tunes on Game Boy, or I like to sing and play guitar, I like to create music of some kind, or I want to be a player, I want to play other people's music. Generally, your job is to build up a fan base. Interacting with social media isn't really an option anymore. You have to do it, or you just don't get called. Because at the end of the day, the people who get these gigs, come on in.
Come join us.
The people who get work are the people who get remembered. And it's not a case about being the greatest player who ever lived, or the greatest session musician, or having the most talent. There is essentially a skill floor that is expected of all musicians who are going to be employed. If you don't reach that floor, and the floor is fairly high, then you don't get work. However, once you've reached that, there is nothing that requires you to be the greatest guitarist, saxophone player, clarinetist that ever lived. You have to be good enough to do the average mean work. But you will get calls if you are someone who people want to work with. At the end of the day, if you're a player or you're a recording artist, your commissions, the things people ask you to do, serve as your portfolio. So, if you're asked to write music for someone, if you're asked to put together an album, if you choose to do so yourself, these are the things that consumers will see. They see the public-facing stuff that you legally can reveal. At the end of the day, you pay rent through commissions, sale of original material, recording, and that's pretty much it. There's an argument that it can be less stable because you're essentially relying on the whims of the public, and public taste can change, Tell that to Smashing Pumpkins. They've definitely gone through better times. But at the end of the day, it could arguably provide more artistic freedom, which may be something that you value. However, Jess will talk now a little bit about one of the other sides of it.
Sure. So if you are catering to businesses, so no matter whether you're a producer or an educator, your job is to build up a reputation. And reputation, like we all know that your reputation precedes you. If you don't have a solid reputation, it's going to be harder to get the gig. You're going to get your reputation through referrals and networking. So if you are an educator, that means going to conferences. That means there are pockets of educators who are really active on social media, reaching out to them, collaborating with them. And that doesn't just mean like, I put up stuff on Teachers Pay Teachers. If you're an educator, it's a great site, but you want to be somebody who is known for like helping out other people, and other people will want to help you in return. There are a couple of Facebook groups that are really active, Reddit subreddits less so, but you can build up a reputation in those circles. Even if you can't go out and like physically network, if you can't go to like your state convention or the national conventions, you can still network online that way. So your clients will serve as your portfolio. Mason, do you want to talk about producing in that regard?
Sure thing. And I'll actually address that in terms of teaching as well.
Sure.
As a producer, your clients serve as your portfolio. It's pretty self-evident. There's an argument to be made, and I would actually literally point it out. When I got hired by Disney for Beyblade, to my knowledge, and I actually asked later on, no one actually listened to my music to check if I was qualified to do the work that I did. No one even questioned it. They just assumed that I was by nature of the things that I had done and having talked to people who I'd worked with. Like, essentially, I was vetted. You know, they asked previous people who I'd worked with. There were people involved in the process who knew me, who knew that I was good for it, as it were. But there wasn't really a moment where it was, okay, you know, now send us 3 tracks of the following various styles and a cover letter of why you want to work on this show. I just got the show. By the same token, I would argue that a lot of times as a teacher, the best opportunity you have to get gigs, even in the public school system, is going to be through direct referrals, through knowing the principal who's hiring, through knowing the administrators in the school district that you're looking to go through, because, you know, there's not really a heck of a lot of competition for a gig that never makes it to the internet. If nothing ever gets posted publicly because they're like, oh, well, we'll need someone new for next year, who do you think should do it? Mm-hmm. And they go to Jess and say, who would you recommend to teach in our district next year? If Jess says a name right then, that's it. There isn't really...
That has a lot of value. And administrators really, really like known quantities. Mm-hmm. So, right, like education, you don't think of as associated with like taking a lot of risks. So if you are a known quantity to them, if you have networked, if people are like, oh yeah, and they have good things to say about you, you're, you know, at the top of the list when they ask like, oh, who would you recommend for this? That's going to guarantee you a gig.
And that's tremendously, you know, even in composition and production, it's obvious exactly what they're looking for. They're looking for people who can provide that music. In teaching, reputation can legitimately mean something as simple as, oh, they're known to be easy to work with. Oh, they're good with kids. It sounds really silly and obvious to say that, but yeah, there are people who would not pass like a criminal background check to work with children. Those people still apply for those jobs.
It is a legal requirement, and they still apply. Yeah. It is a legal requirement that you pass a background check.
So seriously, like, you know, that is something that matters. That's something that's important that I assure you teachers are paying attention to. I would argue that when they're hiring a music teacher, half the time they spend more time confirming and doing their background work to make sure that, you know, this person would never willingly, intentionally, or accidentally hurt a child in any way than whether or not they were the most killin' person to ever take a solo on Giant Steps.
They don't care about my Giant Step solos. They don't.
But her Giant Step is so good. It is so giant. It's so steppy.
Thanks, Mason.
Quality. So, branding. We've said that, you know, you're building a reputation or you're reaching consumers. Aim at the right people. And this is kind of very much business focused right now, but businesses are pretty much as varied as people themselves, but they tend to look for stability. Investigate the company culture and try to match your personal portfolio or website to the type of content they would want to publish. Fans, by contrast, generally want what they perceive to be authenticity. If you create things that you're passionate about, and these are things that they happen to like, then they'll basically do your marketing for you. It's the concept of going viral at the end of the day. It's not like there's some magic network that you have access to, that you put it out and suddenly, you have 30 friends who share it intentionally at just the right moment and it maths out like that. It's about building things that people like and that they can relate to, that they empathize with. And
as far as how that applies to education, if you're applying to like a K-12 gig, say you really want to teach middle school music, yay, that's what I do. Yeah, super exciting. My beginners start on Monday. It's going to be great.
Whoop, whoop, whoop.
Yeah. So when I apply to different jobs, my cover letter looks different for every single place I apply to. So I look online and I kind of cultivate a personal brand within that cover letter that matches what they want. If I'm applying to a gig where there's a marching band, like I hype up my marching band experience. If the school has no marching band and doesn't look like they have like a plan to create one, I don't even mention it. It's not even worth mentioning it. I emphasize something else. So it kind of seems obvious that you'd want to state like, oh yes, I see you have marching band. I also do marching band, or whatever the gig may be. But you want to kind of create a brand within your cover letter that you will then emphasize in the interview.
And this can go the exact same way with music, with being from a production, composition, or business side of things. At the end of the day, if I ever am asked to show music to people, like not even in the context of for work or anything, if I'm just like hanging out with someone and they're like, oh yeah, show me some of your stuff, I've never heard your stuff, then I will usually be actively thinking about what kind of work they do. If I'm being asked that by a jazz player, I'm going to pull out jazz arrangements or charts that I've done, tunes like that will be things that they're into, that will empathize, where when they're in a position of hiring, the stuff they've heard from me is the stuff that relates to them. It doesn't matter that I write, kick butt anime rock to someone who's...
And he does.
Thank you. To someone whose primary hiring is that they're looking for a classical cellist. Frankly, the fact that I'm a composer is irrelevant to that person, in fact. They would care much more about finding out how my Boccherini is. The answer, not great. But they don't need to know that because I show them my Bach. But yeah, branding, focusing on the right people. It's a thing. You do it. The next step, and something that's incredibly important, is developing your network. And this is basically finding the people for whom your branding makes sense and resonates. Your network is full of people who do the same things you do, love what you do, and refer you for work often. And potentially they might be the people who are hiring you as well. If you're a composer, this might be other musicians, directors, film enthusiasts, developers, like anything. If you're a teacher, like this could be, come on in, other teachers, it could be school administrators, employees, members of the PTA. Because, you might switch schools to somewhere where they have another kid, and they might recommend you for that. You never know.
Making nice with the parents is like a huge help. If you want something for your program and you go to your admin and your admin says no, you go to your parents and you go, well, I would love to do this for your kid, and then admin sometimes is much more responsive when they've got, 10 parents saying, hey, this could be really great for our kid, rather than one music teacher saying, hey, I would love to do this for these kids.
Mm-hmm. And to continue and finish kind of our list, if you were, say, a performer, it could be venue owners, people who you're booking with, a booking agent, other artists, because, who are you going to share a stage with? Other artists. It could be graphic designers, the people who work with you to design your stuff. You never know where a gig can come from in that side of things. Your network doesn't really need to be a specific group of people for it to be successful. It just needs to be actively maintained. And what I mean by that is you need to make a concerted effort to reach out to these people regularly. Your network is only as valuable as those people's ability to remember you when they have a need for you. It doesn't matter if you are the most kick-butt saxophone player that person knows if they don't remember you when they need a saxophone player. If they see you once a year, say at MAGFest and they jam. They're like, you're like great person. I love hanging out with you. You play awesome. I'll hire you. And then a gig rolls around in August and it's been 6 months, 7 months. I don't know how to count. I'm a musician. Then
4.
Several. Several months. Then, you're not going to get that gig, even if this is someone who'd said they wanted to give you the gig, who wanted to actively work with it. Have an actual interest in people's lives and be proactive. Reach out directly. If you know that someone, even if you don't know if someone has work for you, continue to reach out and build a relationship. God forbid you make some friends in the process. Your network is really, behind all the business mumbo-jumbo, the people who you call friend and who would call you their friend. So ways that you can do that, how to be successful at that, I'll take the start on this. Be prepared to travel. And this applies even as a teacher, as Jess can explain in a moment. But your friends probably don't all live in the same city. Personally, I'll be very upfront about what I have to do in order to make my career basically work. I live in Boston, which is not the best for music as a composer and the film and game industry. So I travel to LA multiple times a year. I travel to San Francisco at least once or twice a year. I go down to Austin multiple times a year. I go down to Nashville. I go all over the place. I go basically anywhere that I have large groups of friends. I go to New York all the time to keep up in these people, to hang out with these people outside of a work context so that our relationship remains strong and I continue to get to see them. And as a teacher, it works too.
Yeah, sure. As a teacher, what this could look like if you're doing like K-12 education, you might, travel to the conferences. There's like your state conference. There might be a district conference. So like, the Northeast area conference. I'm also from Boston. But there's the national conference. So there are conferences that you can travel to. If you are a private teacher, like you're like, oh, I play bass and I want to teach bass lessons, what traveling could mean for you to develop a network. There are so many private lesson teachers who are like, you come to my house, you come to my studio, but there are many successful private teachers who like actually travel to their students. And especially, if you're looking to teach kids, parents love that you can make that work for them. Like you'll go to their house and they don't have to worry about getting the kid there on time. So that's what traveling could look like for you if you're an educator.
Mm-hmm. So additionally, you should be ready to invest in your career. This is a literal, tangible money cost. I will tell you that straight up, when I got out of college, I basically looked at all the money I had, which was nothing. Go college.
Yay, college.
And I said, all right, well, I'm not eating out again until I can afford some of the basic merch and like gear that I need to subside. Like my audio interface. And again, I was a college student, fresh out, no real income, very broke, was like $2,500. And personally, I don't buy anything on, like a payment plan. I just try to avoid that wherever possible. I'm not a fan of going into debt if I can avoid it. So that just meant that I literally had to save very aggressively to build up funds to be able to afford that, because that was a basic minimum piece of gear that I needed to be able to do the work that I was actively being called on to do. At the end of the day, instruments, the exact same way. You need to have an instrument that you can make sound good, that works for what you need it to do. If you're a classical player, congratulations. Your instrument is probably anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000. I'm sorry. It's not my fault. I didn't do it. My cello is very expensive. These are things that have to be maintained. The maintenance on these things is expensive. If you're a guitar player, you don't go and like play your strings until they're dead. You switch them out regularly after you've done like a few gigs and before they start to sound worse, because you don't want to ever be at a point where you're not sounding optimal.
Yay, reed instruments.
Yeah. You have to buy reeds constantly.
Yep.
Investment doesn't always have to mean a large cost. It can be small, repeatable costs, but it requires acknowledging that these costs are part fundamentally of the business you do, and that you need to factor them in on a consistent basis if you want to break even at the end of the day, or hopefully be making a profit.
And investing, as far as education goes, I'm just gonna like pepper in the education stuff too. That could mean attending workshops, and sometimes if you're actually working at a school, the school will pay the cost. It can mean getting certified in different areas of music. It can mean, in a lot of states, you actually need a master's degree. So it can mean going out and getting a master's if you already have a bachelor's.
Mm-hmm. So we kind of talked about taking an interest in others. Again, the moral is do it and be earnest and legitimate about it. You know, people can smell if you don't actually care to hang out with them. Like, everyone can tell when you're hanging out with someone and the entire time you're just like, yeah. And like you're not really there with them. Do your best to, and you know, everyone also by the same token to just go on and decide on that. People understand if you get messages while you're hanging out with someone. Like, I'm not saying, oh, put your phone away, never touch it. Just, you know, be honest. If you get a message from your wife in the middle of hanging out with someone, you can be, yo, this is my wife, hold on. If I don't answer this, like, they're going to break my arm. That's not true. Mostly.
Caitlin's vicious, isn't she?
She's terrifying. All of the bruises are underneath the shirt. That's why I wear dark shirts. I'm kidding. But to move forward, all joking aside, reach out when you need help. If you're hitting the end of your rope and gigs don't seem to be materializing, by nature of the freelance side of things, of the composer-performer side, you will go through dry spells. That's reality. You know, no one, no matter how successful, how good they are, how amazing they are at their field, is always killing it professionally. I remember I had a conversation with a voice actor friend who, I don't know if any of y'all know voice actors, but he's a fairly successful as far as they go dude. His name's Patton. He's been in everything from like Ghost Stories to Inuyasha to like tons of top tier stuff. In spite of the fact that, and he also does like audiobooks for like Marvel, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Like he does those too. Like he does a lot of stuff very regularly, very actively. He still works part-time as an assistant at a local theater, like ushering and stuff like that, in between gigs when work gets dry, because at the end of the day, his bills don't care whether or not he's having a great time of year. It can turn around on a dime. Like Dawn, who's in our band, who's in our group with Tournament Arc, her like March, April, May, I think she legitimately had one voice acting gig that entire time for 3 hours, which is not very much money for those of you who are unaware of how that works if she only worked 3 hours in 3 months. She's hugely overemployed. She's crazy busy right now, but, you know, it turned around. You know, in her case, she's working in TV context, and one season, she didn't get any roles meaningfully. She had one extra background thing, and the next season, she had like 3 leads and got into Dragon Ball Super. Like, go figure. You never know. It's the exact same thing for music. I went through, I think, 7 months or so after I'd finished Ruby, where I didn't have a single major composing gig, and I had like small things that I was doing, but nothing relevant. And then I was playing a concert, and roughly around intermission, I got a message asking me to start working stuff on Beyblade, out of nowhere. I didn't predict that. I didn't know that they were doing that. It wasn't on my radar. I wasn't even like thinking to check in on that. But the person who hired that remembered me, and they helped me out in that case. When these things happen to you, when opportunity knocks, you say yes, a lot. Never say yes to something that you cannot do. That is very important, because then you get a reputation, as we've established, as a person who doesn't deliver. But if you can do it, if it's physically possible for you to do it, or for you to learn how to do it, or for you to deliver in the time that they require, you say yes. If you're a teacher, and if you're like a private teacher and you know another private teacher who's going on vacation and needs someone to take care of their students, if you can, you say yes. Even if they happen to be instruments that aren't your primary thing, if you know how to teach the stuff that they're doing, if you know how to take care of those students in that time, help out. For all you know, that person may move to another city and say, hey, I want all of my students to go to you when I'm done. There you go. That's a huge thing.
It happens a lot in substitute teaching as well. Even if you're trying to break into a school and like you haven't really gotten hired yet, you've had private students, you really want to teach in a school, say yes to a substitute gig, even if it's just like, you know, a sporadic gig, or lots of times like the long-term sub gigs often turn into full-time positions. So even if you're like, oh, but that's not really what I'm looking for, that looks like 3 months of employment, I want like consistent employment, it can turn into more really easily if you just say yes to these kinds of gigs.
So let's move forward just a little bit. Let's talk about negotiations. So at this point, we're assuming that someone has called you for a gig of some kind. Maybe it's playing on a show, maybe it's playing a recording session, maybe it's just to play with someone's bar band, maybe it's teaching, you're being potentially interviewed for a job in a school district. Maybe it's a parent who's like, I want my kid to have private lessons, but I want to meet with you first to make sure that you're not a child predator. You know, it could be any number of things. Things that you should do. 1, know your rights. Understand if you're a composer, you know, what rights you own, what you don't, what things they're asking for you. The more you can know about the legal side of music authorship and ownership, the better condition you're in. Generally speaking, my first, I can go through several iterations of contract negotiations quite comfortably before I have to worry about getting a lawyer for a final read-through on things, because I've spent a lot of time working in music law additionally and studying it actively. And it helps because I know what my rights are. I can write contracts if I need to. I can take care of that without having to pay for that. But I know that when the time comes, when it's important, I will always, without any concern, lawyer up and pay for that. At the end of the day, a lawyer, in my firm opinion as a composer and producer, is legitimately the cheapest expense that you will ever have. Lawyers make you money. If you're hiring a lawyer and you're not walking away with more money than you would have had without a lawyer, then you either shouldn't have hired a lawyer in the first place, it was the wrong time, or you hired the wrong lawyer. Lawyers make you money. They make your career more stable. They protect you from potential risk. They limit your personal damage and potential in all situations. Know your valuation. Know what you are providing to people. Know if you're a teacher that school district needs to have someone to cover for 16 credit hours worth of, I only know the college equivalent because I haven't done that much, but know what they need you to teach for, know what the pay rate is for that. If you start teaching in Lexington, in Massachusetts, for example, I just happen to know the rates there.
It's a very nice neighborhood.
It's a very nice neighborhood. You can confidently expect that if you are full-time there, the starting rate as a teacher would be at least $48,000 and higher if you're an ensemble director. If you walk in and they're not a unionized school district and they say, well, what do you want to get paid? And you go,
never name a number first.
Yeah. You're like, I don't know, like $10 an hour. My last job was $9. Then they'll be like, okay, that's reasonable. We can work with that.
If they say yes really quickly, you've named too low.
Yeah. And it's not really something where you can be like, oh, dang, I should have asked. Wait, I mean, actually, $200 an hour. Like, that don't work. It's essentially just something that you walk away knowing that you could have done better the next time, and you file that away.
And there's a lot of information online as well. If you're thinking about being an educator, lots of public districts make their salary scale public. Mm-hmm. So that's something that you can research going in. If you are going to be a private teacher and you're like, I don't know, when I took private lessons, it was $30 an hour, and somebody else is charging, $50 an hour. Yeah, that's not the case anymore. So if you're going to teach private lessons, search up other people in your area teaching your instrument and see what they're getting an hour, and you should also ask for that same amount. Even if you're like, oh man, $50 an hour, do I really command $50 an hour? You do if the market says that you do. If people are willing to pay you $50 an hour, then yeah, that's your rate.
Yeah, no, straight up, I've done private lessons. I'm not anywhere near the educator that Jess is, but when I do lessons for cello, I charge $75. That is my rate. That's what I've found works. That's what I've found is fairly consistent, and it's what I will charge. It's not something that If I were looking to be a full-time studio teacher, I might have to lower my rates closer to $60 if I wanted to fill up a 40-hour week. But if you're only looking for that, top 10% worth of students who will pay that premium, you can do that. That can be something that is one of your side hustles if it's not something you even want to focus on. So when I say valuation overall, I basically mean know the value that you provide. Understand what it is you're doing. If you're an engineer, I'll give a shout out for our engineers in the audience. If you're working on a system that, if it breaks down, loses the company millions of dollars per hour, as theoretically happens with some people, then that's something that you consider in your negotiations, because that's not the kind of job that a company should be skimping on when they're negotiating with you. They should be working very hard to keep the right people for those jobs. If you're working on a franchise as a composer and you know that this franchise is going to do several $1 million or tens of millions of dollars in sales, flat out, just guaranteed, then I'm not going to start my negotiations by saying, well, what's your budget? Like, what works for you? Let me work with you. I'm going to tell them flat out, all right, this is real as heck. This is what it costs for me to do this. This is what it will cost for you to get it done with anyone. Here's what I'm charging. You're going to want to pay whatever number I say because it's the right number. And part of the reputation thing is them just taking you at your word if you tell them a number that, yeah, no, they know that you're good for it. When it comes to what you ask for more than you need. If you're looking for a job as a teacher and you're hoping that your salary there will be $50,000, then personally, I would start out, I would say, without lying, say, all right, well, my previous work was X number of dollars, and I was expecting to start at 65. And they may say, oh, well, we're a public school in the South, and our starting rate is 28. And you'll go, oh, wow, I really misjudged that. But still, I cannot afford to work at $28,000. I would feel much more comfortable being valued more accurately to the service I'm providing. I'm going to offer $45,000. And you might be surprised to find they say, oh, well, you have a master's degree, you have 5 years experience. Yeah, no, we'll go with it.
And this is really okay to do. I'm sure there are a lot of us out there like me who I'm like, but I don't want them to have to tell me no. I want to work with them. I want to seem reasonable. I don't want them to tell me no. A lot of the time, if you make an offer and they say no, that's often not the end of it. It's really okay. It is okay if they're like, no, we can't work with that number, and then they can counter with something. And it's okay for you to tell them no too. Mm-hmm. It's really hard when you're like, I really want this gig. I really hate to tell people no. I want them to like me. I want to do a good job. Saying no is okay, and is part of the negotiating process.
As an example story of doing that from the composer side, I was actually working fairly recently on negotiations with a publisher for soundtrack, because I own the full rights on the soundtrack, and they wanted to have a cut for Steam sales specifically. They wanted to have a cut of the soundtrack sales if it was placed on the Steam page because they administrate the page, which all things considered is fairly reasonable. They told me that the figure they needed, which was the figure they had for publishing the game, which is a fairly normal one, was 30%. I legitimately laughed at them and hung up the phone. I waited for them to call back. This was my negotiating tactic because I knew...
If you've got Mason's reputation, you can do this.
And I knew who I was talking to, so I knew that this was going to work on them because I knew that he would bend. And this was something that I was very confident in doing. So I laughed, I hung up the phone. I got a call from the developer saying, yo, well, I really want for you to take this thing because it'll be better for both of us and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, well, let me be clear. I don't want to worry the developer. I'm going to agree to a deal with them, but how much are you going to be paying me to cover the loss of income that I'll be doing since I've been budgeting and charging you based on a certain rate of ownership? And suddenly he went back to the publisher panicking, saying he didn't think I was going to deal. Suddenly when the publisher said, well, what's your rate? And I said, let's do 10%. They were like, we could probably make it work at 15. which is immediately 50% of their offer. I told them, well, I'm willing to meet you halfway. I'll take 12.5. I want to show you that I am not just, trying to send you the finger. And sure enough, 12.5, they were done. Like, we cut off almost 60-something% of what they were asking for just by essentially being very direct and saying exactly what I wanted and negotiating it properly, being upfront about it. Walk away from bad deals. If they were going to insist on 30%, I was going to walk away flat out. I was going to tell them, you know what, this isn't going on the Steam page. I'll just continue to upload it. I'll use Bandcamp, I'll Spotify, iTunes, everything else, and I will actively market the music is not on the Steam page. And I'll just, make it very clear. And that'll be totally fine. And they were very insistent that they wanted to make it happen because at the end of the day, the publisher knew that game soundtrack being available will automatically generate a certain percentage higher of game sales because people see, oh, this game has a soundtrack too? Okay, I'll just grab both. Sure, that sounds good. That's more money that's going into that Steam page, that's going through that publisher. It's worth them at the end of the day. They want to do it. It makes for a more attractive bundling offer when they go to something like Humble Bundle or to one of those services to say, here, we can throw you guys 500 keys for this game and also the soundtrack, because suddenly it's more value provided to the end consumer. So in this case, I knew what they were looking for, and I negotiated very firmly on what I wanted. So let's talk a little bit about what's left to do. You've got your work. You've negotiated very firmly. You've threatened to walk away if that's what it takes. And you walked away if you really needed to and went on to find better gigs with better clients. And it's time to do your job. Be organized. I don't think there's anything else to say about that. Just be organized.
Especially if you're an educator. If you're a freelancer, if you're an educator, sometimes the Department of Ed just drops in sometimes, and they're like, "Where's your lesson plan?" I'm like, "Oh, do you see this lovely binder right here? I have it for you." And yeah, this is a real thing that has happened, and I've felt way less stressed just knowing I have all the stuff there. If you're organized, your life is so much better.
Yeah. If you're not organized, then you're just not as good of a person professionally.
That's what we're really trying to say.
And you should feel bad. But seriously, it makes your life easier. Think of it like this. Imagine you were going to a recording studio and you're debating what studio you want to hire. Do you pick the place that has Cheetos on the floor, that's kind of dirty, that has paperwork all over the place, where the owner-operator seems very frazzled and not quite paying attention? Or do you pick the nice, shiny, clean place that has all of the nice gear that looks like it's run by a German car maker? That's usually a pretty easy decision for most people, especially if they're actually working with real money to decide these things. Budget like they forgot to pay you. This is just a good tip for life. If you're relying on your next paycheck to show up in order to pay your rent or pay your bills, what if something happens? What if, I don't know, terrible example, but it's true. There was a major earthquake in Japan, yesterday or the day before, out in Hokkaido. So I have Japanese clients, some of whom are in that direction. I fundamentally don't expect to hear from some of them for a while, just because, that's life. That's not a case of them being unprofessional. Something happened. There's an earthquake out there. That's not on, there's a point where it's not really something that's going to work if you be like, well, I'm just going to turn around, invoice them even higher, and suddenly they'll respond. They're not going to respond if they don't have the internet. There's nothing they can do. You will get laughed out of court if you try to bring them to court for that. And it's no, there was an act of God. I'm sorry, this is a thing we cover. So you need to be very stable, ideally, with your finances. You need to save, budget accordingly. Even if you're not working on a contract basis like that, work in a way where you can always afford to pay your bills, even if your payment is late. If something happens in your school district and for some reason the comptroller, whatever, I don't know, the budgeting people, I don't work in a school. The magical money people, the money fairies, forget to mail you your check. Be ready for that, be careful. Ask for referrals after you finish something. And this goes as a teacher as well.
Yes.
When you are teaching someone's kids, ask the parents, say, hey, if you feel that I have been serving your child well and they've been growing under my training, then I would love if you would be willing to provide a quote saying as much, or if you'd be willing to serve as a reference if people ask for, current students or current people who I've worked with. Same thing when you do a gig as a composer or producer. Ask the artists you work with, ask the companies you work with. Be like, hey, I want to be able, I want to contract and confirm that I can use your company's logo on my website to say, I've worked with these people, they vouch for me, here's where you can contact them to confirm that I'm not just lying about that. These are things that you should be negotiating for, that you should be very clear, you should be upfront about. And they're things that are expected if you're doing your job. So it's never an inconvenience or impolite to ask for a referral. It's something you should do actively and consistently.
Even those of you who are people pleasers, it's really okay. This is another thing I want to tell you, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. And then the last thing that's fairly relevant, support others. Be the person who refers others. If you get offered a gig and you can't do it, think of that person who would use that gig, who could afford it, and give them that gig. I've been offered great gigs that I would have legitimately loved to take, where I was like, well, I'm already more or less fully booked right now. I probably will be for the next 6 months. So unless something gets meaningfully delayed, there's no way I could do this. But have you met Ted? It's not that deep a cut, but moderately deep. Thank you, guys. I see how it is. Thank you, Maria. But, remember your friends. Remember the people who looked out for you. Go out of your way to help those people. Do things for them, even if they haven't done anything for you, frankly.
People like to return favors.
Yeah. It's a classic sales technique that's often used with charity, is to give you something free or very cheap so that they can later solicit you for a purchase or for a donation, and you will feel like you should give them something because they've given you something, even if what they gave you is nowhere near equivalent to what you would give them. That exact same concept works when it comes to referrals. Give people work, especially if you can afford to do it. If it's reasonable, it's not inconvenient, help other people out. They'll help you in your time of need. When you give that message saying, hey, I could use a hand, I'm a little short on work, they'll answer the call. So, any questions? Things you should do would be asking questions, getting questions answered, thinking of additional questions, using those additional questions. And then I would recommend you trade business cards if you're in this room, because most of the people here are probably interested in music professionally in some way, which is why you're here. So, maybe look at the person next to you, trade business cards with them, and introduce each other.
Facebook friends.
The internet is awesome. Do we have any questions? You can ask anything you want. I'm Team Jacob.
Oh. I didn't know that about you.
I'm actually not, though.
Good.
I'm team neither. I'm team celibate for her. But for real, any questions, anything we can elaborate on, anything you'd like to know?
What was your first composition for money?
First composition for money? First composition to generate income, I didn't realize was going to. It was something that I did for a competition, basically for fun. Not really a competition, more like a concert series type of thing, but one where they were picking specific people to be a part of it. It was called the Vox Novus 60 by 60, and it was minute-long pieces of music that could be basically anything, like whatever you wanted, but it had to be exactly 1 minute long. And it was an hour-long concert. It was a very avant-garde thing where they played all 60 of them back to back. And so I wrote one of those, and I submitted it to them, and it ended up getting performed in a parade in New York City, which I was like a college freshman in Texas at the time, so I was like, what? Like, what is this crap? What are they doing? And I later found out there was, quote, aerial choreography. So it was some kind of Cirque du Soleil nonsense going on. To this day, like one of the greatest things that I was just like, I have music that was aerially choreographed, whatever that means, because I wasn't there for it. But that piece ended up generating some money later on down the road through like licensing and stuff. Other questions?
How do you get the first gig? You don't have a portfolio.
As a player, arranger, pick a specific thing that you would meet.
Get all the expertise up there.
Okay. The answer is that you make something yourself and you draw the attention to it. If you've never worked with anyone, you make something, doesn't matter what it is, something that is cool enough that you can show it to people who would find it compelling, and then you do your best to, like, you know, parlay that into collaborative projects. You start building up relationships with other people. You say, hey, you know, I made this super cool Persona cover on my own. Now I kind of want to do an EP. I want to do like 4 songs of it. Would you be down to play on this album? Like, you know, there's no money. We don't have any budget. It's just a thing we're doing for fun, but I'll work for you on a future project as well. And you start building up those relationships and going back and forth with people. Before you know it, you've made an EP. It's something that may generate income for you. It's something that has built relationships with the players you used on it or the other arrangers or mixers who were involved in it. So suddenly, you were beginning to build a nascent network, and you have specific things you can point to when you try to go for that first gig.
As far as first gig in education goes, if you want to be like a private teacher, you can reach out to local music studios, see if they're hiring. A lot of the time they're hiring, and they're hiring substitutes. Substituting is one of the easiest ways to break into education. Even if you're like, but I really need a full-time gig, subbing is usually the way to get in there, whether it's for another private teacher, whether it's for a long-term sub position at a school. A lot of the time, the first gig in education comes from subbing.
Mm-hmm.
And really, all you need for that, if you're going to sub, is you just need to pass a background check. Like, there's no licensure involved a lot of the time. There's no union stuff involved a lot of the time. You just got to pass a background check.
Which hopefully you can do.
Hopefully.
I believe in you. Any other questions? I don't know when this panel is supposed to end.
2:45. We're doing good.
2:45? Okay, so we've got like a couple minutes. We're safe. What's up?
It's just
Oh, you're just thumbs
up.
up? Nice. Well, you know, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I would say that if we don't have any questions, we essentially call it.
Yeah, and if you have more questions that you think of later, we are running another panel tomorrow, Music Arranging 101 at 8 p.m. in the Makerspace. For all of those of you who couldn't find the Makerspace calendar like me, it's tomorrow, 8 p.m. in the Makerspace if you want to learn how to arrange music. Mm-hmm. And you can ask us questions then too.
Absolutely. In conclusion, if there's anything we can help you with, don't hesitate to ask. We're fans of people making a living from music because it's what we do, even violists. Gonna let that one settle.
Tough crowd. Tough crowd.
If we can answer any questions, we're happy to do so in as much detail as possible. Reach out to us if you're curious. I'm on Twitter and Facebook. Jess is on Facebook. We both have emails and cards. I think we both have cards.
Mason has cards.
I have cards. Jess has the internet.
I have the internet.
But yeah. Anyways, thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you.